I think of resilience as a deep-rooted belief that no matter what happens, you will be okay. No matter what happens, that fundamentally you as a human being are okay. And this is not a Pollyanna, everything is fabulous kind of thing. Bad stuff happens, but resilience is about how you pick yourself up and keep going. Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research-adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research-adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello and welcome to the Research Adjacent podcast. So it's just Sarah this week and it's a solo episode, and it is inspired by something that recent guest Lorna Wilson said when she was interviewed for the Nature Careers podcast that came out in September. And she said that resilience is one of the most important skills to succeed in research-adjacent roles. The other two being diplomacy and interpersonal skills. And for me, suddenly so many things clicked into place, and I realised that everything I have been working on recently is connected to helping people to build resilience. And that includes things that I've been doing in my personal life and as a yoga teacher as well. So this episode is going to be about what resilience means to me and how we can get better at it. So first up, why me? Why am I in any way qualified to talk about resilience? So I have been interested in resilience for a very long time. I just hadn't called it that, I think, or joined the dots between a lot of the things I do. So for example, the interviews in this podcast are essentially stories of resilience. I've done a lot of work with young people around careers and STEM subjects, and that's essentially been about preparing them for an unpredictable world and helping them to know that they always have choices no matter what happens. As a yoga teacher, I help people to build physical and mental resilience through movement and mindfulness. And as a parent, a big part of my job is to help my daughter to become resilient. And I have the added challenge that she's neurodivergent, so she needs unconventional approaches and extra support. And then there's the fact that I'm a freelancer and I've had to have a hard look at my choices to make sure that I can still provide for my family whilst following what is inherently a risky path. And it just goes on and on. There's so many things like that throughout my career that have had a connection to resilience. And I felt like I had some insights, some thoughts that I wanted to share. So I hope that you find them interesting. The first one being that although I am no Boyzone fan, Ronan Keating was right when he said that life is a roller coaster. There will be ups and there will be downs. And they say that the only thing certain in life is death and taxis, but I would like to add change to that list. I think change is inevitable. And although I am a self-confessed change enthusiast, I have been around long enough to realise that most people are the polar opposite. Most people hate and resist change. And one of the reasons that change can be so painful is that we feel like we've lost control. But fighting it doesn't stop that change from happening. And in fact, being too rigid can mean that we break when we need to bend, and we need to focus instead on the things that we can control. So I think of resilience as a deep-rooted belief that no matter what happens, you will be okay. No matter what happens, that fundamentally you as a human being are okay. And this is not a Pollyanna, everything is fabulous kind of thing. Bad stuff happens, but resilience is about how you pick yourself up and keep going. I really like the analogy of a game of snakes and ladders. Sometimes you get a ladder and you get up the board, but sometimes you get a snake and you slide back right down to the beginning. Sometimes you roll the dice and all that happens is you just move a couple of squares forwards. But if you want to keep playing the game, you have to keep rolling the dice. And life's a bit like that. And it's about trusting that you can figure it out, or that if you can't figure it out on your own, that you can ask for and receive help. I think Lorna is right that resilience is particularly important in the research world. And that is because I think that research and higher education in general is a pretty brutal world. Most of the people who make it in academia are people who did well at school, people who passed exams or came top of the class. To get onto a PhD programme, you have to excel as an undergraduate. So these are people who have never failed before, or certainly haven't failed very often. And many of them will also have been laser focused on academic success, meaning that they missed out on things like sports teams or part-time jobs and things that can teach resilience in the face of failure. Then suddenly, they're competing for funding in jobs where failure becomes the norm. Maybe 90% of grant applications are rejected, and I've been on recruitment panels with 35 people applying for one academic job. Then there's all the publications that are rejected and the cutting reviewers' comments. And even if you do get a PhD or a research job or some funding, there are no guarantees. Experiments don't always work, as I know myself when I spent most of the second year of my PhD having to strip down, clean and rebuild an HPLC because my experiments were not working. Spin-out companies fail, and grimpact, which means something having a negative impact rather than a positive one, is very much a thing. So researchers and those working in the research world go from a place where all you had to do to succeed was to be a good boy or girl and follow the rules and get good grades, to going into a world where cutthroat competition, rejection and failure are the norm. Is it any wonder that so many researchers and academics are miserable? And then before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that research culture can be toxic, and the way that some academics normalise overwork, bullying and competition is breaking people. I know that sometimes the conversation around resilience is seen as helping people to just put up with what's going on and with the bad stuff that's happening in the world, and I don't ascribe to that. I know that there are lots of conversations going on at the moment to try and change these really toxic aspects of research culture, and research culture very much needs to change. But I believe that change starts with people. I'm not saying for 1 second that positive thinking will magic away all the problems, but to help people to change things, they need to be resilient. And that resilience can help you to resist unreasonable demands, to turn competition into collaboration, and to treat yourselves and others with kindness when things don't go to plan. So that's why I think it's a really important step, and resistance needs resilience. Since becoming a yoga teacher, I have learned a lot about how our nervous systems work. And basically, we haven't really moved on in millions of years, and our brains can't really tell the difference between a lion and a scary email. Anything that feels like a threat, real or imagined, triggers our nervous system to react in the 4 ways that you've probably heard of: fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. Your brain is trying to keep you safe. That's what our brains have evolved in order to do. But staying safe all the time doesn't lead to a fulfilling life. And there's lots of research that has found that a certain amount of challenge and the pride that comes from overcoming that challenge is essential for our sense of a life well lived. So although life throws stress and challenge and change at us, resilience helps us to deal with that change in a more healthy and productive way. But at different times of our lives, those stresses and challenges would be different, and our appetite for stress and challenge changes too. It's often easier to take risks when we feel financially or professionally secure, and paradoxically, when we feel like we have nothing to lose, so at the 2 ends of the spectrum. And although resilience isn't necessarily about taking risks, I do think it is about helping us to face our fears and not letting them limit us. So I also think that resilience requires a certain amount of reflection, self-knowledge, and considered action. But I do think resilience is something that can be learned. I think some people are naturally more resilient than others. Certainly in my family, I'm the more resilient one, but that's not to say that I don't work at it, because I do. I work at it every day. I have habits and things that I do that help me to be more resilient. And I think everyone can be more resilient and more able to cope with life's challenges. So reflecting on what I do and what I've learned from my years of experience and what I teach in yoga and other scenarios, here are what I think are 3 elements to resilience. And they are mindset, skills, and practical tools. Now, to help you understand what I mean by those 3 things, I want to give you an analogy of a car. So when it comes to a car, the skills are the fact that you need to know how to drive, first of all. You need to pass your driving test, you need to know what all the buttons do, and it's also important to make sure that you yourself are safe to drive. So that means you're not tired, you haven't been drinking alcohol or whatever in the time that you are running up to making this journey. Then the practical tools, well, that is making sure that your car is safe to drive, making sure that it's got an MOT, making sure that it's got petrol, the tyres are pumped up, all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's making sure you've got some snacks for the journey, you've got a map, you know where you're going, and then that you have got a reliable mechanic on standby if you break down. Then finally we come to mindset. And to me, mindset is thinking about who is in the car with you. And who would you rather have in the car with you? Is your mindset a screaming toddler who's constantly demanding attention, or a really critical backseat driver? Or is your mindset an encouraging best friend who brings a great mixtape and all the good snacks? To relate this to work, the same analogy. So this, in terms of it, the skills in a work context are your knowledge and experience, the things that you're good at and your kind of interpersonal skills. The practical aspect is your office, your workplace, your computer, other equipment that you use, your colleagues and managers, the people that are around you, the pay that you get in return for doing your work, and the way that you get to work. So all these other things that help you to actually be in work and do what it is that you do. But then the mindset comes in as well, and that is believing that you can do the job, that you're capable, that you're good at it, that when challenges come along, you can figure them out. So this skills, practical tools and mindset model works in lots of different scenarios. So although I think mindset's really important, I am going to start with skills because I think this sort of a little bit, some of these other ones are a little bit easier to get your head around. And I think there are skills that we can learn and things that we can do that help to support our resilience. The first one is self-care. Now, please don't turn off. I know it sounds really boring, but as they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you need to deal with a difficult boss or a stressful project or a sick family member, you'll be able to do it so much more effectively if you are taking care of yourself. And when I talk about self-care, I don't mean bubble baths and scented candles, or even, yoga if you want, but that's not an essential if it's not your thing. I'm talking about really foundational stuff. So having a neurodivergent child has really taught me how important the basics are. Without decent food and adequate sleep, she is challenging, shall we say. So it's really important to get those basics right. And if you're not taking care of yourself in those ways, then it can all go horribly wrong. Then something I am so passionate about is movement and exercise. And you would expect it as a yoga teacher, but I do some kind of exercise every day. I think it's really important to move the body. And I think that mindfulness practices are really helpful too. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because there's lots of other people who do that sort of thing, if that's what you're interested in. Another thing that I think is self-care, and maybe it does come from the neurodivergent thing, is routine and planning. And sometimes these things like good food and exercise, it's easier if they just happen as part of life, and so planning for the week or something that you just do every day can become a lot more straightforward. Then having a bit of fun in life and connecting with others, I think, is a really important part of self-care as well. So doing things that are outside of work, doing things that are outside of the situation that is causing you stress, and that is just for yourself and just for fun, whatever that might be. Then on to the next one of the skills that I wanted to talk about, which is holding boundaries. Now, I've done a whole episode, which is number 14, on boundaries, so I'd encourage you to go back and have a listen to that. But just to do a quick recap, I think that balance in and of itself, in terms of work-life balance, isn't necessarily a helpful notion. There will always be peaks and troughs in our lives and busy periods and quiet periods. But I think that learning what your boundaries are and how to enforce them can go a long way to preserving sanity and boosting resilience. Everybody's boundaries will be slightly different, and the ones that you need to enforce might be around the time that you need for self-care. It might be around the hours that you work. It might be around having boundaries around the way that people treat you. And everyone will have different deal breakers. But if you do find yourself getting angry or resentful about something, then there is a good chance that it's because somebody is breaking your boundaries. The last skill that I wanted to talk to in this podcast today is that of asking for and accepting help. And I have included it in the skills section because for a lot of people, myself included, this doesn't always come naturally. I think in the knowledge economy, and I include research and academia in that, is very focused on the individual and what you know, what you contribute, and how you can sort of publicly prove your value in the world. And that leads to a feeling that we have to do everything ourselves, and that asking for or accepting help can feel like admitting failure. But the truth is that no one is good at everything, and everyone needs help sometimes. And not only that, but people love to help other people. I bet that you, if a friend came to you and asked for help, you would go, of course I'll help you. We like to feel needed and we like to feel useful. So remember that if you do ask for help, you aren't necessarily just being selfish. You might actually be giving someone else the opportunity to do something that makes them feel good, as well as getting the help that you need. But yeah, I need to practice this one more, so I'm not judging anybody. Moving on now then to think about practical tools. And the first one I want to talk about is backup plans. Now for me, practical tools are things which are a bit more external, which we can put in place in order to help make us more resilient. And the reason I'm coming first to backup plans is because I used to be an event manager. I still do a bit now, but I used to do a lot of really big events. And obviously you hope that nothing bad is going to happen, but the best event managers are massive overthinkers, and they have contingency plans for everything. Whether, a speaker doesn't turn up, whether the fire alarm goes off, whether you have to call an ambulance. And I have had all of these things happen. And thinking through the worst that can happen is helpful, because it means that you can make a practical plan for what to do instead of panicking and thinking, what if? So thinking, what is it that you're really scared of? What is it that for you personally would be the most challenging thing to deal with? So maybe it's that you lose your job, and what would you do then? Do you need to have a plan B? Do you need a savings account so that you can survive for a while you're looking for a new job? Do you need to start looking for a new job now? Is this something that's on the horizon? So you've got an idea of what to do. Honestly, I always have some kind of plan B in every part of my life, so that if things don't go the way I want them to, I know exactly what I'll do next, which saves time and energy and stress. Now, when it comes to backup plans, one area that inevitably comes up is finances. And for many people, especially now, finances are a big worry, and it might be that your big worry is that you lose your job and so you can't pay your bills. And if you are feeling vulnerable in this area, I would encourage you to take a really honest look at your finances and think about what it is that you need to do to feel more financially resilient. Maybe you need to build some savings. Maybe you need to look for a more secure, a better paid job. Maybe you need to pay more into your pension if you're that age. Maybe you want to get some life insurance so that you know your family is taken care of. I am not a financial advisor, so I can't tell you what would be the best thing for you to do. But what I can tell you is that most of us don't get taught much about this as we're growing up. It's not something that they cover in school. So most of us are muddling through as best we can. If you want some proper advice, personally, I have found the Rebel Finance School really helpful. You can find them on YouTube, but definitely something not to shy away from if you want to build your resilience in this area. Another thing that we can do to help boost our resilience is to be a lifelong learner. Now, learning is not only great for our personal satisfaction and intellectual stimulation, it also helps us to keep up with the changing world. And that can mean you've got a buffer against career challenges. And it may mean that you're ready to take up new opportunities in your current role, or to change careers, or maybe give you that backup plan that you need. For example, I'm a qualified teacher, so for 7 years I worked in a college as a college lecturer. And what that does for me is that it means I've never needed to do it, but I know that I can always go and do supply teaching if things got really pear-shaped. And that gives me a lot of peace of mind that I know what I would do. Maybe for you, it's thinking, well, I could go to a temp agency or something if it got really bad, or you've got other skills that you can turn to. The last one of my practical tools I wanted to mention in this section is the support of other human beings. And I know I've already talked about asking for and receiving help, but I wanted to mention it here too, because I think it's really important. Going back to the car analogy, most of us wouldn't try and repair our own car. We would trust that a mechanic would know much better what to do than we do. And the same goes for human support. Whether it's a partner, family, friends, colleagues, a mentor or coach, help at home like childcare or a cleaner, a doctor or a counsellor, whether you need practical support or support for developing your skills, support for your physical or mental health, whatever you need, there are people out there somewhere who can help with what you need. And I think that that human support is sometimes a little bit underrated. So now moving on to mindset, I've left this one to last as it is a really big topic, and I know that what I talk about here will only scratch the surface, but I do think that mindset is make or break for our resilience. Thinking back again to that car analogy, mindset is the difference between trying to drive your car with a supportive friend in the passenger seat or a screaming toddler at the back who's kicking the back of the seat. Is that what it's like inside your head? You know, inside your head, have you got that supportive friend or have you got the screaming toddler? The first and most important thing here is don't believe everything you think. One of the first things that we learn in yoga and meditation is to treat thoughts like clouds that are passing in the sky. Remember that your brain wants to keep you safe, and catastrophizing is totally normal, but rarely helpful. Unless you're doing it as part of making that backup plan that I talked about earlier. The first thing I want to talk about here is what the marvellous Brene Brown calls FFTs, or effing first times. I can't say the word because I'll get blocked as explicit on all the podcast channels. Most of the things that are worth learning take time and practice, and whether that's learning to ride a bike, or learning to write a funding application. And just because you don't succeed the first time or the 10th time, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. Really thinking about these things as effing first times is an acknowledgement that the first time you try something new, it will probably go really badly, and that's okay. To give you an example, some examples from me. The first day in one job, I had to go and meet a school group and take them to get lunch. That was the thing I had to do that day. I went and met entirely the wrong school group. They got a bonus surprise lunch, and while the others went hungry. Oops. Also, when I first started doing presentations at uni, I was told that the people in the front row feared for their lives because in those days we used a kind of pool cue thing as a board pointer, and I was unselfconsciously swinging it around. Now I can stand up in front of groups of people and do presentations. I can do a podcast. But certainly my career in public speaking did not start well. But all of that leads me very nicely onto my next point, which is forgiveness. And goodness me, we are hard on ourselves. If we spoke to friends the way that we speak to ourselves inside our heads, we would have no friends left. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to be upset. It's absolutely okay to feel your feelings when things go wrong. But learning to be kind to ourselves and forgive ourselves when things don't go to plan is so important. Yoga philosophy has been hugely influential to me here. There is an idea in yoga philosophy called ahimsa, which means doing no harm. And that means to ourselves as well as to other people. And I say this to my yoga students all the time, and I really mean it. You are enough. You are doing enough. And sometimes you just have to trust the journey. And as they say in Scotland, what's for you'll no go by you, which means if something is meant to be, it will happen. And so if you take nothing else away from this podcast, please be a bit kinder to yourself, and it will spill over into every other part of your life. Trust me, I'm a doctor. Okay, a plant doctor, but still a doctor, and a yoga teacher, and I'm Scottish, so, I can say all these things. Now, I feel like I couldn't do a research-related take on resilience without mentioning imposter phenomena, as everyone is talking about it. Imposter phenomena is the paralysing fear that you're not really qualified or knowledgeable enough for what you are doing, and any minute you could be found out. You are an imposter. I think the important thing to know here is that everyone feels that way sometimes. Right now, here I am doing a podcast and thinking to myself, who am I to be teaching anyone about resilience? I haven't got it all figured out. And the truth is that although it can come and go, everybody feels like an imposter sometimes, and it often gets worse actually the more senior you get. But as I said at the beginning of this section, don't believe everything you think. To repeat myself once more, you are enough, you are good enough, you know enough, you have something unique to contribute to the world. And if it helps, allow yourself to be a contributor to the conversation without the pressure to be a thought leader. It's only by trying to think that way that I wanted to be a contributor, not a guru. And that's what gave me the guts to start this podcast in the first place. Then there is how we do deal with those negative thoughts when they come along. One of my daughter's biggest challenges is overthinking. She has an ADHD brain which hyper focuses on negative thoughts, and then they spiral around and around in her head and make her more agitated. The only way to get her out of this spiral is distraction. You need something to flip the switch in her brain. That can be something fun or comforting. Sometimes intense physical sensations help, like a hot bath or holding an ice cube. And physical activity helps too, so going out for a walk, or when she was little to jump on a trampoline or something like that. The point is that she needs to shift her focus from the negative thought to something that is outside of herself. And this is something I've really learned in yoga as well, is the way that we can shift our focus. And we can never fully control what we focus on. Our mind will always wander, but we can learn to notice and be deliberate about where we place our attention. Now, what works for you is a personal journey, but from what I've seen, it almost always involves switching our focus from internal thoughts to the external world, or from the mind to the body. There are some things that are called pattern interrupters that can help. But I think what I've found is that the antidote to overthinking is always just doing something, anything that helps to get you out of that mindset. And when it comes to thinking about something you can do to help you get you out of that mindset, a good way of shifting our focus is to think about all the things that we do have and the things that we are grateful for, rather than the things that we don't have. And it's been shown time and time again that practicing gratitude is hugely beneficial for our well-being. It also helps us to be more resilient, as we're more able to notice and appreciate what's truly important in life and hold these things close when times get difficult. To recognise perhaps that even though we didn't get a particular job, we still have our family or our health. An exercise I like to do sometimes, and sometimes with my classes, is to think about the things that you have now that when you were younger, you really longed for. And that might be a house, a car, a job, a degree, a family, whatever it is. Things that at some point in the past you really desperately wanted. And trust that in the future you will look back with gratitude for what it is that you are doing right now. So to wind this up, I am going to stop there as a quick overview of how I think about resilience. This is something I feel like I could go on and on about. I had to really limit myself about what I decided to include. It does feel like something that draws together all the things that I have done throughout my life. So thank you for listening. I hope that it's been useful. I would love to hear your thoughts, especially whether this is the kind of thing you'd like to hear more about. And keep your ears peeled for another project that I've got coming up, which is going to be focusing on normalising failure. I'm doing a podcast and a workshop with previous guest Orla Kelly, and that's going to be really interesting. And if training on resilience is something that you and your colleagues would be interested in, then please do get in touch. So to close, if you will allow me to go into yoga teacher mode for just a moment, I want to invite you, if it's safe to do so, to close your eyes, put your right hand over your heart, take a deep breath, and as you exhale, say quietly to yourself, I can cope with whatever life throws at me. I am enough. Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links under the episode to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the Research Adjacent Roundup newsletter. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.